Hello, everyone. Today we have Steven Forrest, our dear guest, who is going to be chatting with us for a while. Thank you so much, Steven, for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
As you all might know, he's written many books, and he is the creator, we can say, of the field of evolutionary astrology. And I'm really hoping to get to know more about it today. So, to start, what brought you to this field? Like, how did you come about studying evolutionary astrology?
Well, I got into astrology through pretty much of a back door. I was an amateur astronomer when I was a kid, looking through telescopes, and I approached it from a scientific perspective, but I couldn't escape the feeling in my heart that I was looking at something that was alive. It was not just hydrogen turning into helium, but there was an intelligence out there. And that was the road that led me to begin to study astrology long ago.
That's amazing. Thank you. So, since you wrote your book, The Inner Sky, is there any aspect of it that you would, treat differently today, or something that you would like to dive deeper in with your current knowledge?
A couple of changes, but I guess I would like to initially respond by saying that I am grateful to the universe that there's really nothing much in that book that I would change, and which I hope it doesn't mean I haven't learned anything in all the years since then. I think I have, but I'm proud of the inner sky, and I still agree with the essence of it. Uh, Beyond that, I feel like my understanding of the action of the planet Pluto improved quite a lot after I'd written The Inner Sky. So I would rewrite that chapter. And also just one small thing. I call the ascendant the mask in that book, a term I stole from Carl Gustav Jung, which is a wonderful way to look smarter than you actually are. Always steal from Carl Jung. He used the word persona, the Greek word for mask, and it's our social personality. And that works pretty well as a way of thinking of the ascendant. But since then, I've come up with a better metaphor. I think of the ascendant like stained glass, like you would see in the window of a church, and the light of the deeper psyche shines through the stained glass, and it's given a tint or a hue. It's an elegant metaphor, but it's also really more accurate than a mask. So I really wish I'd thought of that when I was writing The Inner Sky, but that only came a few years later.
That's a beautiful metaphor. So I know by experience that in Italy and in Europe in general, astrology is not viewed with as much importance, or maybe it's not given such a high place into our consideration. We tend to push it off to the side, whilst in America it seems to be more valued. Do you agree with that? How do you feel astrology is viewed in the US?
Well, it's been encouraging and heartening to watch astrology star rise over my lifetime. When I started it out in the field, it was almost embarrassing if somebody would say, "Well, what do you do?" And I say, "I'm an astrologer." I wasn't really embarrassed about being an astrologer, but I was in this impossible situation that when I said I was an astrologer, they assumed that I was a charlatan or I was incredibly gullible, and so it was almost like there was no way to convey what the word meant without being misunderstood. It was, I suppose, analogous to racism or sexism, where people have something in their head that blinds them to the person who's standing in front of them. And over the many years of my career, it's been just very encouraging to watch astrology win the war for minds and hearts, and some of that, most of it really, I attribute to hardworking astrologers, kind of working with people one at a time. And you do a good reading for somebody, it helps them. They tell their friends, and their friends tell their friends, and what we have is the history of the last 50 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So about, readings, I would love to know your approach. So how do you go about reading a birth chart and interpreting?
Well, that's obviously a huge question. I could do a product placement here and say anybody who wants the real answer should enroll in the Forrest Center for Evolutionary Astrology, which is about a 3 or 4 year program. But I won't give you the 3 or 4 year answer to your question. Let me just say that most astrologers, the majority of astrologers, there's so many different traditions, but most of them will purport to pull two rabbits out of the magician's hat. And the first one is your personality profile, and the second, a set of predictions for your future. I
Mhm.
do not believe in that kind of astrology, mostly because I do believe that we evolve. That's why I call myself an evolutionary astrologer. We might have made personality profile statements about you, for example, 10 years ago that were totally accurate 10 years ago, but you're wiser now. You're a different person now. You're not as dumb as you once were, me either. And that's encouraging. So your personality profile changes. We evolve. This is simply a fact. And as we become wiser, we make better choices, different choices, and they land us in a different future than the one we would have landed in if we hadn't had courage enough to have those long, hard talks with ourselves. Now, all that I've said here is simple and obvious, and I'm not going to get the Pulitzer Prize for it, but I want to look at astrology in a way that doesn't fly in the face of common sense. And common sense suggests we're capable of change. So instead of the paradigm that here's your personality and here's your fate, I look at a chart as a blueprint for the life that you were born to live. It's the happiest life, the luckiest life, the one where your potentials are maximized, but also the life you were born to live in a deeper sense, where I assume metaphysical perspectives, really, that you're a soul, an ancient soul, each one of us, and that we have been born with our charts, with the charts with which we have been born, because they represent our path, our next steps forward in our evolution. So there's something deeply purposeful about astrology. So I that's really the best answer to your question, that entire paradigm shift that distinguishes evolutionary astrology from the more commonplace kinds.
Oh, thank you so much. So, seeing as we are an evolving race, as we as humans are always growing and our societies are constantly evolving, do you believe that if we were to use astrology in politics, take it into consideration, we would achieve, generically speaking, a better society? Like, would that be a useful tool?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. Uh, I have no doubt about that. It's politics, for good or for ill. It really comes down to people's values and humans, the monkey aspect of our human nature is all about acquisition. It's all about money. It's all about power. It's all about the availability of sexual partners. It's just monkey business, total monkey business, and we see that in politics. We see that in my life and probably in your life too sometimes, because we're human. But being human, it's a very interesting condition because we're souls with incredible potentials. And here we are in these animal bodies, torn between the two directions. And I'm saying all this because astrology focuses our attention on the higher ground. It focuses our attention on how we might evolve and the idea that there is a fundamental spiritual purpose to life. And if more people thought like that, there would be fewer people thinking about money and power. We'd have better politicians, better lawyers, better musicians, better everything. Astrology can help society because it deepens and improves our values.
Definitely. So, do you think that technology uh, and in particular, how astrology is becoming more and more popular on like social media and such. Do you think this popularization is going to help us as a collective to realize what we can do to build a better future for ourselves?
It's a complicated question. If I had to answer it simply, I'd say yes. Uh, it's anybody who's serious about astrology. We just throw up our hands in despair when we run into somebody who thinks it's sun sign astrology, who thinks that's what we do. You know, I'm a Gemini, so I talk too much, or you know, that kind of thing. And so we're often frustrated by the more superficial forms of astrology. I balance that though with just a little piece of autobiography, which is that one day when I was a kid, I put a coin in a machine and got a description of Capricorn out of the machine, and it was terrible. You know, it was embarrassing. But it got me interested in astrology, and so if it weren't for the silliest form of astrology, I wouldn't know astrology existed. It was the doorway for me. So I think there's real purpose in even the simplest form of astrology. If you will, I'd like to take that one step further. It's a subject I like talking about. So let's say there's somebody who talks too much, who happens to be a Gemini. Now, I'd quickly say that not all Geminis talk too much. That's a slander, but there are Geminis who talk too much. And so we have a Gemini who talks too much, and they learn that they talk too much because they're a Gemini. And all of this sounds totally silly. And in many ways it is. But here's the beautiful thing. I'm connected to the cosmos. I talk too much because I'm a Gemini. Gemini is up in the sky. Here I am down on the earth, a little bit of the sky inside of me. Even the dumbest form of astrology connects us to the cosmos. And that's a beautiful thing. I like to honor even the simplest forms of astrology just for that reason.
So you might say that a simple post on Instagram is like an entryway, a doorway to the deeper knowledge of astrology and how that can help us and impact our life.
Exactly, exactly. And of course, when I was young, it was all sun signs. That's all we could do without mathematics, basically, knowing the time and place of a person's birth. But now, more technical astrology has become vastly more available because of technology. So even a lot of the Instagram or YouTube kind of stuff has, I won't call it sophisticated, but it's a giant step ahead of there's 12 kinds of people in the world. So we're good things are happening. The snowball is rolling down the hill.
Yeah, totally agree. So you mentioned that your journey with astrology started since you were really young. Do you have any tips for an enthusiast or like a rookie astrology who's trying to get into it?
I would say make a decision for starters about whether you want to be an astrologer
Yeah.
or simply someone who's helped by astrology. They're both perfectly honorable. I drive a car, but I'm not a mechanic, you know, and I don't really want to go to mechanic school. I have other things I want to do with my life. And so if we simply want to be helped by astrology, the best advice I could give a person would be to find an astrologer and recognize it's like finding a psychotherapist. A skillful astrologer might not be your astrologer. There might not be enough common ground. So find someone who moves your heart. You know, ask your friends, and you may have to spend a little money on some readings that don't help you, but eventually you'll find somebody who can kind of speak for the planets for you. And you don't have to know astrology because this person will guide you. It's like having a doctor or, once again, a psychotherapist. If you want to learn astrology and become an astrologer professionally, or simply empower yourself to help yourself or help your friends with astrology, There are lots of options and lots of shades of gray. Again, I love evolutionary astrology, and I'd suggest anybody join my school. If they want to learn this kind of astrology, I don't want to be too partisan about it. There are other forms that might work better for other people, but a formal course of study is helpful. When my students start out in my school, I tell them. This is it's like going to law school or medical school. You can do it, but it's going to take a small number of years. It's going to take some hard work. It's a serious undertaking. It is about as complicated as being an attorney or being a doctor.
Totally, yeah. So you agree when people say that astrology is not to be taken so lightly as it might seem, because it's an ancient art and an ancient science. And about that, would you say it's more of an art or more of a science? Like, what does it
Uh,
represent to you?
yeah, it's really both. Um, and there are creative, intuitive aspects to it, definitely. Um, for one thing, being a counseling astrologer, working with people, has the same foundation as being a theoretical astrologer. Someone who studies it for the science of it. The basic foundation intellectually is the same, but to present a reading to a person who knows nothing about astrology is theater. It's like being on stage, except you're hopefully being totally sincere and engaged lovingly with the person. But there are sound theoretical astrologers who offer a lecture, and I have to say, inside of 10 minutes, I'm struggling to keep my eyes open. They're boring, and that's an absolute catastrophe if you're in front of an audience. So presenting astrology and understanding astrology are really two different skills. And somebody's a theoretical astrologer, they're a hobbyist or a student or a researcher. They total respect for them. I don't mean to criticize them, but there are people who really shouldn't be on the front lines, so to speak, representing astrology to the public.
I see. So you mentioned that you specialize in evolutionary astrology, but you also mentioned karma. How do you feel that plays into your studies?
Well, they're inseparable concepts. In evolutionary astrology, our working assumption is reincarnation. So immediately we're in the territory of karma. When I'm with a client, I don't want to force reincarnation on anybody. That would be inappropriate. So I will say we can look at this in terms of ancestral themes, your genetic heritage, if we want to, and family patterns passed down. I use the language of reincarnation, but if somebody asks me not to, I'll switch. This is sort of funny. The next line is, as I say, I always ask people if they'd like me not to use reincarnational language. I've lost count, 50,000 readings or something crazy like that at this point. I'm a Capricorn. I work really hard, and I've been at this a long time. But 2 times people have asked me not to use reincarnational language, only 2 times. And one of them was a professor at Catholic University in Washington, D.C., here in the States. And he came back for a reading a couple of years later and said it was okay for me to talk about his past lives this time. So I'm down to one person out of 50,000 who wasn't at least open-minded and curious about past lives. You've got me going here, so I'll take this a step further. Here's pure logic. Once we realize that astrology works, And anybody who pays it any honest, open-minded attention will quickly be convinced, that there's something to it. So once we realize it works, there's two ways to reckon with that. One, that the universe is completely random and pointless, and the roulette wheel stopped at a certain moment, and here's your chart, and eventually you'll die, and it didn't mean anything in the first place. That's logically consistent. I don't agree with it, but there's a certain logic in it. Once we reject that, we have to assume that you have your birth chart for a reason. Now, if I say that to any group of astrologers, you have your birth chart for a reason, everybody's nodding their head. But here's where the logic comes in. Any reason that you have your birth chart had to happen before you had the birth chart. The birth chart is an effect. What caused you, what made it meaningful for you to be born at the time and place you were, and any answer has to exist in the time before you were born. That is not a proof of reincarnation, but it's really consistent with the idea of reincarnation. And so fundamental to evolutionary astrology is we approach it like the way a psychologist, if you enter deep therapy, the psychologist will be asking you questions about your childhood and your family experiences. And in evolutionary astrology, we would accept that, but we also think of what we might call the childhood of your soul, unresolved issues left over from prior lifetimes, right back to your word, karma. It's absolutely central to what we do.
Thank you. That was really enlightening. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, of course, what would you say is the core, besides, karma and what comes before, like your soul is actually formed into this lifetime? What would you say is the core of evolutionary astrology? Does it have a set purpose?
Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent question. What I've said so far is how your chart reflects your karmic predicament, so to speak. Here's the more exciting piece and the more important piece and the core of everything. It also talks about how to get on with it, how to get to your future. In Buddhism, there's a concept you hear over and over again, skillful means. And the idea is that a hunger to become a better person, a more compassionate, more loving, wiser person is a laudable thing. That's wonderful if anybody has such a motivation. But what turns it into rocket fuel is if you use skillful means, if you harness that good desire to a method that is suited to you. And so we can go to a church or ally ourselves with a religion, and they will offer you a skillful means, but it's typically one size fits all. What astrology does is it tells you what you are needing to develop personally, where you get the most, we say in America, bang for the buck, like a buck is a dollar, where you get the most effective support out of it. So I was making fun of Gemini a little while ago, the slander that all the Geminis talk too much, which again, emphatically is not true. But Gemini is very much about communication. And so I would say that if I'm working with a Gemini person, you're learning how to listen, because you learn a lot more with your mouth closed than with your mouth open. And as you learn and you think about what you're learning, you have increasingly interesting things to say. And so the archetype of the teacher is in fact powerful in you. But let's start with the archetype of the student. You've come into this world to develop an open mind, to learn anything. Your ambition is to be wiser when you die than when you were born. And so, start studying life, living life. And I mean, there's just a few words, but it's the core of evolutionary astrology, and that we're talking about for that person a skillful means. And that might not be what I would say to a Scorpio or to a Pisces. They would have different prescriptions, different means.
Of course, thank you. So, in the beginning, we mentioned Pluto, and I know that you actually wrote a book dedicated to Pluto. I wanted to know the cat. I wanted
Yeah.
to know.
I locked mine out.
She sneaked in, actually. She's not kidding, but yeah. What I was meaning to ask you was, um, what do you think the impact of Pluto being in Capricorn for so long is? And what is your vision for this new era of Pluto in Aquarius? Sorry about the
Yeah,
kitty.
yeah, a huge subject. We're definitely in the Capricorn end game right
Mhm,
now. So 2008, Pluto entered Capricorn.
mhm,
The nature of Pluto is that it brings unconscious material to the surface.
mhm.
Uh, Again, the metaphor of psychotherapy comes to mind. Anybody who's ever been in deep psychotherapy knows two things. It's an absolutely miserable process, and it's worth it, which really says a lot about the nature of Pluto. So whatever is shadowy, whatever is wounded, is brought to the surface so we can become conscious of it, so we can heal from it. That is the evolutionary purpose of Pluto. Now, Capricorn, here's where it gets interesting. Capricorn, one thing Capricorn represents is traditional values. Values that have a long history and a lot of traction in human consciousness. Like, here's healthy Capricorn. If you have a child, take responsibility for that kid. That's serious. Don't screw it up. This is your kid. Act like a grown-up. Uh, Here's another. Be true to your word. Try to be a person of integrity. If you say something, mean it. If you promise something, do it.
Of course.
This is beautiful Capricorn, healthy Capricorn. These values are not original. They've been around a long time. Wonderful. Now, here's some more traditional values: sexism, racism,
Yeah.
homophobia, the idea that the earth is infinitely exploitable, that we can dine on the earth, forever.
Mm,
Those are values that have been around a long time. We think of a person with a brown paint job falls in love with a person with a paler, more tan paint job, such as yours or mine. And not too long ago, I mean, obviously that was judged, but it was judged morally. Like you're showing bad character if you're a white person who has had sex with a black person. Shame on you. It's a moral failure. People believed that, actually believed that. It was a traditional value. So isn't it interesting that since 2008, even though it's been hell on earth in so many ways, that there has been so much raising of consciousness about our sexism, our racism, our homophobia in each person individually. Now, some of us have gotten cleaner and clearer about all that. We're better. And I really wish that were in the headlines, that good things have come from this. But of course, we've also seen the boil being burst, and all the people who want to defend the old things seem particularly empowered and enraged. And so the healing from these dark traditional values is reaching a crescendo right now. We'll move into Aquarius soon. We're kind of in and out, over the line now, but by the end of 24, we're into Aquarius. And so we think of Aquarius is associated with more progressive values. And I think we've come up with a lot of answers about what is wrong with society. I think we'll start coming up with answers of a more positive nature. It's like, how do we make this work? A classic illustration here is the current kerfuffle about transgender athletes, people who are born male, having fistfights with people who are born female and winning. What's the right thing? What's the moral response to that? I don't want to answer it. I want to say society will answer it, but it's an illustration of we start to have the Aquarian world, but let's figure out exactly what that means, how we're gonna work that. Just one more point. There's a dark side to progress. Sometimes I put progress in quotation marks. Progress isn't always progress. I think of the French Revolution, classic illustration. It was a progressive movement theoretically, but of course it had many horrible effects. Vicious, violent effects. The English people years ago, late 18th century, decided that they could cure the problem of crime in society, which they viewed as a genetic problem. Some people are just born criminals, so we'll send them all to Australia. The great transportation. And what happened was actually the first generation or two of Australians, some of the most honest, honorable people who ever lived. And there was a rise in the rate of crime in Britain. Progress and science, they don't always work. We'll see the dark side of the progressive movement for sure, just as we've seen the dark side of the conservative movement since 2008.
Of course. But do you reckon that at the end of this lengthy process of this quite huge shift, do you think there will be a positive outcome?
I'm an optimist. I say that more as a personal response. I'd say yes. Astrologically, I'm completely committed to the idea of human freedom. And freedom has a dark side. We're free to make a mess out of everything. We're free to not be free. If we use the word freedom, we have to include that. People can choose to be enslaved. And so I would say astrologically, I don't know the answer. Will humanity even survive this? But personally, I tend to be optimistic. I suspect we'll muddle through. We have a dark obsession with the shadow, with everything that goes wrong. I touched on this earlier. Like, I think of incredible improvement in terms of sexism, racism, and homophobia, the big three, the incredible improvement humanity has created pretty much all over the earth about that. It's still horrors everywhere, but we're better. We're better. We've done the work. The idea that the earth can be exploited forever, it's getting harder and harder to find anybody who believes that. The global climate crisis, you still find a few people who pretend it's not happening, but they're becoming increasingly rare. And so improvements and spiritual growth tend to be ignored by the media. And it's on the basis that they're real, even if they're not reported, that I have some confidence in humanity's ability to get through this and make a better world. We're certainly ready for one.
Of course. So I assume you agree with the sentiment that in order for there to be actual complete progress, there needs to be not only technological advancement, but also like a collective growth in our spirit and in our mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And astrology is part of that. There's another, the Pluto and Capricorn stuff would be part of that as we become less crazy, essentially, just to put it simply. But there's another piece of the puzzle that is not getting enough attention, and that's Neptune still being there in Pisces. It doesn't have too much longer left, but another couple of years, again, it's back and forth across the Aries border. But in 2011 and 12, it crossed into Pisces. And so Neptunian energy has been very strong on the planet. It rules Pisces, so it's real powerful there. And I would think of this rapid acceleration in spiritual growth that's happened. There's a lot more conscious people on the planet now than there were, 15 years ago. I would think of like how many people who were students of yoga are now yoga teachers. How many people who meditated occasionally now meditate regularly or are meditation teachers, and this, some of this is just people growing up, but I think it's also bigger than that. It's like the planet growing up. There's interesting history here. I'll not get windy about this one because I could, but watching Neptune pass through Pisces historically, every time there has been a spiritual awakening on the planet, and often it was only obvious in retrospect. So I think we're living through a great awakening, and that's wonderful. I'd add also, here's to the children who have been born with Neptune in Pisces. Some of them, born in 2011 or 2012 are just beginning to have their voices heard a little bit, but we haven't heard much from them yet. Give it 10 years, 20 years. We're going to have a lot of saints on the earth. We need them too.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. It gives me hope for the future we're about to build, and I myself am going to have to contribute to. So thank you.
Great, thanks.
So we talked about the impact astrology is having and how we can popularize it and the purpose it can serve us. But do you think there's anything specifically we can do to give astrology all the importance it deserves and portray it well to the media, to the masses?
Yeah, each of us who are interested in astrology will have different skills there. I've been a technical astrologer, counseling professional astrologer all my life. That's really been the heart of my work, and yet I've also attempted some outreach to the larger community. There's a popular magazine, I think it's in Europe too, it's called Elle magazine, for which I wrote the monthly astrology column for about a year and a half. And I did okay. I know how to write, but it wasn't a good fit. I'm not a sun sign astrologer. But the technological revolution has bridged me back into the mainstream in a way that I've been working for 5 years or so on a project called Lila. That's a cell phone app, astrological cell phone app, and it's really fairly sophisticated. It's only on iPhone now. You can Google Lila astrology. I think Lila Relate Deeper. It's Lila. There's some of it's free. There's a paid version now, and it's growing. Obviously, I'm doing a little product placement here, but it's also the bridge that brings a more sophisticated kind of astrology into a state of easy availability to people who have a casual openness and a casual interest. They can get something much closer to the real deal now, even for free or for very little money for a slightly more sophisticated version. That's a way to build a bridge, back to society.
Definitely. Well, please do let us know when it becomes available for Android also, because in Europe it's
I use an Android, so it's a little frustrating for me. But it's very expensive to convert iPhone stuff to Android stuff, and we're going to do it. But right now, the money is tight and has to be targeted more carefully.
Of course. But is there anything you've been studying lately that you feel it's important to share? Like any specific topic?
Mm-hmm. For the last several years, I have been increasingly sensitive to two huge dimensions of astrology that for many years I downplayed. I didn't pay much attention to them. One of them is the phases of the moon, the phase we're born under, and also the progressed phases, the relationship between the progressed moon and the progressed sun, hugely important. And until maybe 10 years ago, I didn't really pay much attention. And then the second one is declination, when how far above or below the celestial equator a planet is, they can get really high. And if like the sun can get no further north of the celestial equator than about 23.5 degrees. It sounds like science class, but then the moon and most of the planets can get a little further north, or ditto for south. Now, here's where the fun comes in. The sun is the boss. The sun rules the solar system. You will orbit me, deal with it. The sun's gravity. But when a planet is out of bounds, it's still, of course, bound to the sun gravitationally, but it's a little out of the reach of the sun. I just met your cat, and so one of the skills that a cat has is how to position itself that far from the full extent of your arm, so you can't quite reach the cat. Cats have that quality of independence, and a planet that's out of bounds, that's beyond that about 23.5 degree thing, has that quality. It becomes a little wild. It's like it's in a conjunction with the planet Uranus would be a way to convey it to a working astrologer. It's especially vivid with the moon, although we can see it with most of the other planets too. Out of bounds moon people, we get geniuses like Albert Einstein. We get criminals who break the rules, like it's practically a who's who of the Nazi Party back in World War II, those out of bounds moons. And so it's like anything in astrology, there's good news and bad news, but it's a really powerful piece of the puzzle. And for years, I paid it no attention. I love that I can still learn. That's half the joy of the system.
Of course. Well, I can only thank you so very much for joining us and for dedicating a bit of your time to us. I found everything you said to be really interesting, and maybe some people like me will get to know a different area that they hadn't heard about before. And
Great,
so,
I hope so. Now, this will come out in Italy. Will it be in Italian? Will there be dubs or?
probably subtitles.
Uh-huh.
Subtitles or
Wow.
dub.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Great.
Let me just stop the recording.
Good. Okay. Thank you.